So we are live. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're joining us in the world. My name's Meg and I'm part of the social media team here at FICS. And today we're speaking to Dr. Henry Pollard about the FICS Research Commission. So he is FICS Research Commission Chair, and he'll be talking all about the Research Commission, about himself, about a fantastic paper that he's just published. So without further ado, I will kick over to you, Dr. Pollard. Would you like to tell us a bit about yourself?
Thanks, Meg. G'day, viewers from beautiful Cronulla in Sydney, Australia. Thanks for the opportunity to have a chat about some new and exciting directions for FICS. First, a little bit about me. I've been in practice for 35 years. Graduated from Sydney College, which is now the Macquarie University pre-runner course. Then went from there to do some postgraduate sports science, and then did my PhD in biomedical science, where I ran a bunch of clinical trials. I worked at Macquarie Uni for about 20 years, and then a couple of other unis here and there. And I published 130 odd papers. Our most recent one being a paper, proud dad moment, with my daughter on a thunderclap headache that presented to me. So that makes for interesting reading. That's in Chiropractic and Manual Therapies Journal, if you feel like having a bit of a look at that. So I've been working with sports teams for a long time, not so much these days, but certainly in the earlier part of my career. And I've been doing a little bit more in the way of research. And so I've joined up with FICS. I've been with FICS for quite a while, but now I'm taking over the reins, as it were, of the Research Commission, and we're going to have perhaps a slightly different approach to the way we're going with things at the moment. I think that when we think about what's gone on in research, there's been a tremendous increase in the research output of the profession in the last sort of 10 to 20 years, and there are some fantastic researchers out there doing some very, very great work. One area I think where we still have a deficiency in the profession is one of looking at the various special interest groups within the profession. I think we're beginning to amass a lot of data on neck pain and back pain, but that's more in a general chiropractic practice setting. I think what we need to do now, and particularly for FICS, and this is where my role comes in, is to try to establish research that is sports specific and that looks after the aspects of sports chiropractic, because we need to put an evidence base under what we do as sports chiropractors. So as we move forward, we're looking to do this not just from an international perspective, but also from a regional perspective. And so we look to establish some short, medium, and long-term goals to do all of that. So we want to create a bit of an outline of what we want to do, and then importantly, which this is, I think, in some regards has only just been recently happening, is communicate it to the researchers around the world. And so the plan is that we get in contact with all the various chiropractic schools around the world and their research directors, and then let them know what are our priority areas in research in sports chiropractic, so that we can encourage them to potentially do some work in those areas. Because I think that as a small profession with limited amount of funding, we really do need to concentrate our effort and focus it. I think we've got a lot of good people, but I think we're sort of we're going at very many different aims and directions and whatnot. And so we just need to, from a FICS perspective, we're just going to try and focus that a little bit to say, well, what are the things that we're actually interested in as a profession? And so some of those things include, describing modern day sports chiropractic practice, describe the patients that present to sports chiropractors, have a look at the satisfaction rating of patients that attend, describe the background of the sports chiros, for example, and we also need to describe, I think, in a lot of detail, the scope of care of sports chiropractors. Now, this has been a big issue here in Australia. I know that myself and many others have often been labelled with the idea that you guys don't have very much in the way of research. And when we respond to that saying, well, we learn all the same things that, physios do and sports physicians do and all this sort of thing, they just say, well, where's the research to show that? And we say, well, we actually often have similar teachers and we have, we study from the same books and the like, but it still keeps coming back to where is the evidence that you guys do this stuff? And so that's an important kind of caveat, I think, in all of this. And so it's our role as chiropractors to describe who we are, what are our backgrounds, what are we doing with patients, what are our outcomes, good, bad, or ugly, and then do comparative studies later on down the piece as well to compare different approaches, et cetera, et cetera. So there's plenty in that, and it's something that's going to take quite some time. However, looking at the outcomes, so to focus the research effort a little bit. Once again, so much needs doing, but we have this issue, limited number of folks that are going to be doing this. So what is the approach? Now, I suggest that we look at things from an anatomical perspective, and we look at prevalence. So let's look at, perhaps the top 2 conditions that present in each of the regions of the body. Have a look at them from the point of view of cost. So what are the most expensive, most common and most expensive conditions to treat that chiropractors manage and interact with others. And then there's the issue of where are we treating and what are the roles, because they're different. If I was to say to you that what is the prevalence of neck pain in a chiropractic practice, and compare that to a doctor's practice, a medical practitioner, compare that to a massage therapist, compare that to the sideline evaluation, compare that to a hospital, you might expect that you get a very different set of conditions that present to each of those jurisdictions. So it's important that as we collect information in all the various scopes that we deal with. So private practice, we need local, state, national, international competition data. We need training data, et cetera, et cetera. So these are the sorts of things that we need to collect, and that from not only from an international perspective, but also from a regional perspective as well. And so I'm very much looking to help to set all of that up. Now, the next thing we need to do too is unfortunately, sometimes we're only as good as our weakest link. So whilst, chiros know full well that we provide a lot of great service with very minimal adverse events, it's not enough for us to just say that we're good and we're okay. We need to prove that, and the only way you do that is to do research and get it published, particularly in not particularly only in peer-reviewed journals, but more properly in non-chiro journals where possible, so that we're not just preaching to the converted. We're getting out and we're speaking to our peers and sometimes those which are don't hold the same opinions of us as we do. So these are all important, and then ultimately too, the goal is to create a vehicle by which we can collect data at all of the FICS events worldwide. So they're fairly lofty goals, but I'm sure that we can do that. There's a lot of talent around the place, and I'm thinking that this could be important. So that's something which is a little bit more of a longer term goal, looking to establish a sports chiro-based research network. Now, I believe they've already begun doing that in Canada and potentially in other places, but I think that this is very, very important. I think the time has come where we begin to utilise a big data approach to data collection, and by that I mean, automated systems that operate through phones, computers, tablets, etc., that can connect history factors with examination factors, with treatment outcomes, and then ultimately also with patient outcomes data as well. So these are really important factors, and I think that we're only just sort of starting to scratch the surface of this type of involvement, but these will cost a few bob to get these things up and running. However, it is something that will create a treasure trove of data, which multiple masters and PhD students and many others combine, all of which improves the outcomes of the profession, the documentation of the outcomes of the profession, and also the higher degree background of those that are involved with it, which then reflects on the profession positively. Now, where I think we need to go, and we haven't done too much of, is that a lot of the data that we've collected in the past has been from volunteers and from university or other easy to get volunteer populations. Moving forward, it's very, very important that our data involves real patients with real practitioners in real settings, using things like cluster randomized controlled trials and things of that nature. And the big data approach will inform that, because you can have software which is designed to create only one kind of input with standardized definitions of everything across the board, and that these can be then used to collect a lot of data. Everybody can use the same software. It drops all of the outcomes directly into spreadsheets, which are then easy to perform analysis on with the assistance of trusty statisticians. So it can really simplify very difficult processes. The idea will be that it'll be designed to run primarily by front office staff. It'll have input by patients, just as with new patient data, and that there'll be limited requirements of the practitioner on an ongoing basis, just simply documenting outcomes, but then also describing who the practitioners are and what their approaches to management are, that type of thing. And so not a lot of input required of the practitioner, but a little bit by the patient. And so by doing so, we can collect a lot of data. The data is thorough, it's consistent, it's reliable, etc., etc. So these are all important aspects of where I hope to go in the next 5 to 10 years. And if not me, certainly setting up directions to follow that.
Fantastic. Yeah, and you mentioned earlier that you've also, and we shared on the FICS Facebook page, your new research paper, which is fantastic. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And for anybody watching, you can read Dr. Pollard's research paper. If you scroll down on our Facebook page a little bit, we've posted the full report. It's a case report, and he'll tell us a little bit about that now.
Sure. So I'm still in clinic. I do that primarily these days, although that'll probably change in the next couple of years. But in doing so, a patient recently presented via tele presentation, so via the phone, with a thunderclap type headache. And as I proceeded through the history taking, it was obvious that this headache was maximal when the patient was standing, and went from an 11 out of 10 headache, worst headache in his life, to 1 to 2 out of 10 when he lied down. Now, in addition to that, by the time I got him to do basic range of motion and all the rest of it, it was apparent that neck movements, back movements, and other movements other than simply the standing or the lying were the only factors that altered this headache. So it was a postural headache. Now, these sorts of headaches are really derived largely from fairly nasty things, but the top of the list is defects in the dura, which is what this thing turned out to be. It had a very happy ending, although some don't. But why it's important is because if you look up spontaneous idiopathic hypotension, what you'll find is that chiropractic adjustment is listed as a causative factor. And I think that this case helps to remove that, because what generally occurred was there's a presentation at point X. That presentation with sort of severe migraine-like symptoms is intercepted by a practitioner. The practitioner, because they haven't asked a couple of questions, misses the fact that there's this postural nature of the headache, which dramatically changes the headache. And as a result of that, a treatment is rendered. Then what happens is that the full nature of this headache continues for the next few days. They end up in hospital, or in this case, projectile vomiting and doing all sorts of other things. And then when they take the history at the hospital, they look in the past that there's been a chiropractic adjustment. And then the headache is then attributed to the adjustment, not the fact that it was a spontaneous event that happened before the adjustment. And so this paper describes the spontaneous event through to management, being picked by a chiro, been referred to the hospital for management. And so we can actually say from a prospective point of view that the chiro had nothing to do with this, and that we can look back in the literature, and there are many examples in the literature where the chiropractic adjustment had been attributed to the headache. And so this is something which I think was a little, there was no medication on the patient at the time. The patient was, fit young man, about 25 years of age, 26 years of age, tall fella. He was 6'8", 205 centimetres. Had recently undergone a prolonged drive. It's quite stressful. They were moving house essentially. They moved to another state, had to drive for 1,000 Ks, and moving, heavy lifting of furniture, that type of thing. And so that may have well been the antecedent event, but it's all fairly speculative at this nature. Given the stature, the tall stature of the patient, he was, as I said, 6'8", basketballer. There's the potential there of connective tissue disorders, because that's known to be a precursor for some of these types of headaches. But in this particular case, Bateman scored 2 out of 9, which is a normal finding, and he was not hypermobile, as you might expect with something like a Ehlers-Danlos or a Marfan syndrome. So as a result of all of that, that was all ruled out, and it just was described as a spontaneous event. It got the standard treatment, which was initially caffeine, which blunts symptoms essentially, and then autologous basically take some blood out of the arm, inject it into the spine, and then the clotting factors in the blood then heal the defect in the dura, and everything returns to normal. That happened within a 3-day event, and he was back playing basketball, which is a contact sport, obviously, 1 month later. So good outcome, and I think it's a good one for the profession, just to show that chiros don't necessarily cause these things.
Fantastic. So thank you so much for coming and speaking to us this morning. For everybody who is watching, Dr. Pollard will be joining us live once a month going forward, and we'll be interviewing and introducing you to another member of the Research Commission. So we'll be slowly meeting all of the different members of the FICS Research Commission over the coming months, and we'll share those times and dates with you on the Facebook page, so keep following the page. If you are watching, you can watch this replay at any point afterwards, because our replays of our live sessions remain permanently on the page, so feel free to come back and reference this at a later point. Keep asking questions as much as you'd like. We have another question from Sam, who's just commented and said, did you continue to comminage the treatment after the treatment using the blood?
So the event unfolded that it took about 9 days to get the blood, which is, given the nature of the headache and the severity of it, I think was too long. But anyway, that's the way it went. So he spent 3 days in hospital. His headache the day after he got the injection went from 11 out of 10 to 3 out of 10. He was discharged from hospital 3 days after. He then was told to rest for 1 week. At 1 week, he was allowed to return to walking, and then at 1 month, he was allowed to return to the contact sports. He has no ongoing symptoms, and so aside from the fact that that we've spoken, he hasn't required any additional treatment, and I've left it alone.
Fantastic. So if you do have any questions, feel free to continue asking them, and we will post comments even after we've logged off. So thank you everybody for joining us, and thank you so much, Dr. Pollard, for joining us today.
Thanks everyone. Cheers. Talk to you soon.